process of your career is to how to write and get published. And what I am trying to get to you today is the experience, my years of experience, along with what I have experienced working with various editor-in-chiefs, exactly what is it that they look for when you submit to a journal, and that of my various colleagues working within Springer and Nature, what we experience, what exactly do we see behind the scene, because what you submit when you go in a journal, you submit your manuscript, there is a different interface that you see. We see things in a different way behind the screens. So I'm going to get you everything all rolled in together. And as you can see, in this particular slide, the topic of this workshop obviously is how to be an author. But apart from that, it's also important to be a communicator, because you can be a good author only when you are able to communicate what you have done with the editor-in-chiefs or the peer reviewers and the editorial boards, and then your readers. So how do you do that? How is it that you become an effective author, get your articles accepted in various journals, submit in various journals of your choice? How do you choose those? So there are various things which we are going to talk today. And in between, I'll try to give you some smart tips that will make you a smart researcher, a smart author, because in this digital world, there are little things that you can do which can actually make your life very easy. And in that, so this is what we are going to discuss today. And before I just dwell on these things, just a little brief on the company that I represent. And the main reason why I'm talking about that is that you may be a little confused about this Springer Nature. And this is because in 2015, the company merged with Macmillan Science and Education to become one company, Springer Nature. And when actually you are choosing journals, looking for journals, you will find these various brands: Nature, BMC, Springer, Scientific American, Palgrave Macmillan. Be rest assured that all these brands are that of one company only. Similarly, many other publishers also have various brands. So if you are aware of what brands different companies have, and that will be very helpful to you. And why am I saying this? That we will discuss further in this presentation. Now, irrespective of the subject areas that you work in, whether it is behavioral science, life sciences, business and economics, chemistry, material science, even humanities, social science and law, there is a journal for every research area, niche or broad science. Whether you are an early career researcher or top researcher in your field, you have a journal for everything within Springer Nature portfolio. And our in-house teams, we have an abstracting and indexing team. They are constantly working with the publishing editors of various journals to support them in preparing these journals, and in supporting editor-in-chiefs in preparing various journals for the evaluation of Scopus, Web of Science, and how we can progress from Q3 in Web of Science to Q1, etc. So this is a process. And this process takes its own time. And just as you all work to, submit your manuscript in various impact factor journals, even we work to make our journals bigger, better, provide you with better services. So that again is a process. And why am I talking about these databases? Again, we'll see subsequently. But before we go any further, the most important topic that we all have gathered for, the logical manuscript structure. Because in this section, we will discuss how to clearly and logically organize all of your ideas for your readers. And please remember, your ideas are complex. What makes you an effective communicator is clearly explaining complex ideas to your readers. And because I've been saying, you need to be a smart author. So let's see, this is the first most important thing. An effective communicator always keep the reader in mind and provides the information they are looking for. So your readers will have 4 main questions about your study. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And how does this study advance the field? Now, have you ever thought that each of these questions are actually related to the structure of your manuscript? So, why answers introduction? What is your methods? What did you find is actually results? And how is actually the discussion point? So, before we look into each of these, here is the first tip of the day for all of you. You know, many young researchers come to me and they always say, how can I publish very, very quickly, maybe in a month or so? I understand that many a times your PhD thesis are at stake, you have various other commitments that you have to fulfill, and you're always in a hurry. But remember one thing, publishing takes its own time, and there is no magic wand by which you can just take the wand and do gilly gilly chew, and there your article is published. It doesn't happen like that. Why we are saying this, again, we'll see further within this presentation. But the main thing that you have to keep in mind is the timeline. Effectively 3 to 12 months, depending on the subject area, depending on the journal that you are submitting to. So keep in mind this publishing timeline when you are, somewhat planning your research and planning how and when you are going to submit. The second most important thing is, because none of us are native English speakers, so we are always struggling with words and how do we express ourselves better. And many a times we are under this impression that, if we write those bombastic words, nice words, big words, then perhaps we will impress the editor-in-chief. But remember, editor-in-chief and peer reviewers are also many a times like you. And they only want clear and right English. When I say right, grammatically right English. What they are more concerned and interested in is your study, your research, what you did, how you did, what you found, etc. So if you are able to communicate that in simple language, grammatically correct, then that is the best thing to do. So do not push yourself into writing big words, very, very impressive words and phrases. Just keep it very, very simple. Simple to the extent that if you can understand it, then you are sure that even others will be able to understand it. These two things are really important, because what happens at times is if these days all of us are using Microsoft Word and all, and synonyms are easily available. We click on synonyms and we find a word looking very nice and we just replace it. But at times, those words have different interpretation. And even depending on country or nationalities, those interpretations vary. So perhaps if you are using something that you are not very sure of, you may be sending a different interpretation of what you are trying to mention. And remember, you are not there sitting in front of them explaining what you have written. So keep it simple. That is what will help you in getting published or getting understood better. With that, now, how do you all actually start writing a manuscript? This is the most important thing. And you will realize why am I saying so. Now, when we are actually started writing, think about it for a fraction of a second. Many of you may start working on title and abstract because obviously that's the first thing to come. But the writing order is this: methods and results is the first thing to be worked upon, thereafter introduction and discussion, and thereafter title and abstract. Now, why am I saying so? Because, methods and results is the first thing that you get acquainted with when you start working on your research. That's the thing that you work on day in and out. You've done your literature research, you are very sure of what methods are being involved in your research, and obviously results is something which is very close to your heart. So writing these two things is the easiest. Write these things down, and with two sections complete, you will get the kind of confidence which is required to move ahead. Secondly, once you have chosen a journal, then start working on introduction and discussion. I'm saying so because if you are looking at the instruction for authors of various journals, then they may have different requirements. And if you have already written this section and thereafter choosing a journal, then you may have to rewrite that. And it's quite a pain to rewrite a particular section. So first is methods and results, something that you have confidence in. Move on to introduction and discussion when you have a journal in mind. And at the last, move on to title and abstract, because by that time you already have a written story with you. You just have to give a title to that story, and it's easier because if you're reading your article once again, then there certain ideas will always pop into your head. But otherwise, because the way in which I'm asking you to write is methods and results, this is how we are going to talk further about it. First section, as I'm telling you, is methods. And what question are you answering in this? What you did. Now, this section will be important for people in your field to not only reproduce what you have done, but also to build on what you have done. Now, always keep in mind for whom are you writing, because that is how you will be able to write a better section. The more people that build on your work, the more impact and influence you will have in the field, building your reputation worldwide. However, please keep in mind that this section is not only essential for researchers in your field, but it is also one of the first section carefully evaluated during peer review. So if reviewers see that you did not use an appropriate and up-to-date methodology, they may often usually recommend the journal editors to reject the manuscript. So just as there are two aspects that you have to keep in mind, your readers and the peer reviewers. What is it that they are looking for so that you don't miss out on those points? So be sure to include all the information these two section are looking at, readers as well as peer reviewers. Thereafter, first, you will need to discuss who and what was used in your study. You will then need to describe how you performed the experiments, including any controls necessary to validate these techniques. Lastly, you need to describe how you analyzed your data, maybe the quantification methods you used, or if you use models and equations, you will need to define all variables and assumptions and identify the statistical tests that you use to determine significance. So if you logically organize all the relevant information about your study design, you will have successfully answered the second key question, right? Thereafter, we move to results. Which question does result answer? The third question, your reader want what you found. This is done in the results section. Now, keep in mind, however, that although you are very familiar with all your findings, your readers are not. So if you do not present your findings, they can become easily confused. So for many fields, a nice logical presentation include, as you can see over here, initial observation, characterization of that observation, and finally, how this observation is useful for the field, what its applications are. Now, and of course, you can see certain do's and don'ts, which is very clearly given here. So I'm not going to repeat it. But another very important thing that you have to keep in mind is when you're writing the results section, you can also think of dividing these in subsections with each with a clear subheading and corresponding to a single figure. This is because it is easier for readers to understand complex information when it is presented one bit at a time, and it avoids information overload. So each subsection should begin by introducing the findings such as figure 1 shows, or first we did this. In that way, readers know what to expect in that subsection, and when readers know what to expect, they will understand those ideas more quickly. Now, because in digital world, you'll find all the manuscripts are online and it's very easy to be distracted. So if you want people to further read your article, then it is important that they actually can relate everything that you are giving to the text that you are mentioning. And that keeps them engrossed further and takes them further in your manuscript. Thereafter, the first question that readers want answered is why your study needed to be done. This is generally answered in the introduction section. So as you can see in this slide, you should start off broad and then guide your readers down to your specific aims. You begin with the basic background information your readers need to understand the context of your study. Then keep in mind the type of journal you are submitting to. So suppose if you are submitting to an international journal, be sure to emphasize the worldwide relevance of your topic. Further, if you are maybe submitting to a broad focus journal, you will need to provide more background information so people outside your immediate field can more clearly understand the context of your research. However, if you are submitting to a specialized journal, then you need not give so much of background information because most of the journal's readers and even the editor-in-chiefs will likely already be familiar with your topics. So once you have provided the context, you now need to tell your readers what is currently known about your topic. So you will need to discuss what has been recently published about this topic, making sure you cite studies that are up to date and broadly distributed worldwide. This is again something that is looked upon in peer review, because if you have cited two things, one, the most classic research related to your area and the most up-to-date research related to your area. And if they don't find these cited within the references of your manuscript, they normally feel that there is something missing, or maybe the most appropriate research has not been referred to. So keep these things in mind. Once you have told your readers what is known about your topic, now you can tell them what is not known. And not known means this is the research problem that serves as the basis of your study. Basically, your research questions are the ones which is not known, right? This will then lead into your specific aims. Be sure that your aims directly address the research problem you identified. It is in this way your readers will clearly understand why your study needs to be done. And once you have done that, we move on to the final section, the discussion. You will answer the last key question that I had shown in the first slide, how your study contributes to the field. Now, I would like to think of this section as the opposite of the intro. In the intro, I was saying you start broad and then narrowly guide your readers down to specific aims. But in the discussion, as you can see on this slide, you want to start narrow, summarizing your key findings, and then guide your readers back to the general implications these findings have for the field. So to do this, you need to interpret your findings. You will have to describe how your findings are similar or even different compared with those that have already been published. You will have to discuss any unexpected or even negative results. You should never hide results from readers or even the editorial board. Just be sure to describe why you think you observe these findings and how future research can further address them if necessary. Because remember, everyone is building further on the research being done. So the clarity of thoughts and the clarity given by you to the researchers is what is more important for them to be building further on your research. Lastly, be sure to describe any limitation to your study design. Your ability to identify your limitations and what measures were taken to control for them establishes your expertise in the field. Now, at the end of the discussion, sometimes as a separate section is the conclusion. Now, remember that this is the last section that will be read, meaning it is likely to be what is remembered most by the readers. So be sure to discuss what is most important about your study, including the main conclusion, key implications, and potential future directions. So if we kind of, summarize what we have done so far, you will have a logical structured manuscript that answers 4 key questions: why this study needs to be done, what you did, what you found, and how your study contributes to the field. But in addition to a nice linear flow of information, I strongly encourage you to link your ideas together throughout your manuscript. So as I've already mentioned, that your objectives should be directly related to the research problem. But this also means that your key findings should be only those that are related to your objectives. Finally, be sure that your conclusion answers the questions you identified in the introduction, because you can't say that you started working with an objective, but ultimately the results were totally very, very different. That's why I'm saying your manuscript is actually like a story. Have you ever thought of it like that? If you highlight an important problem in the beginning of your story, your readers expect an answer to that question by the time they finish. And that answer is your conclusion or your results. When you're linking these ideas together throughout your manuscript, it will help emphasize the significance and relevance of your study for your readers, and it will make a nice, well entwined manuscript, even for a pleasure for the editor-in-chief and the board to read. Now, before your readers will have a chance to read your paper, you need to get their attention first, and you will do that with your title. This is what people will first see when looking for articles to read. Because of this, there are some important points to keep in mind about what you should and should not include. So your title should clearly state what is most important about your study. This is what your readers are looking for. Your title, remember this is really important, will also be used in indexing by databases online. So be sure to include 1 or 2 keywords to improve visibility, because just try to think, how do you find a particular paper? Don't you go in various databases? It could be database of your library or that of PubMed or Medline or maybe Web of Science to try and find the research related to what you're doing, and which means that keywords are really, really important. So be very clear of what keywords you are going to mention. And if you can use those in title, nothing like that. Lastly, keep your title short. When people are quickly reading pages after pages of title in those online databases, they may skip ones that are too long. Don't let that happen to you. Now, what you should avoid in your title. First, avoid questions. Now, again, this is subjective, because in certain human science disciplines, questions do look good in titles. But in certain science discipline, it is better to avoid questions, because readers already have questions and they are looking for answers. So the answer to their question is what is important, your key findings or conclusion of your study. Now, also avoid method-based titles. Again, it varies from discipline to discipline. Lastly, avoid abbreviations. If people outside of your immediate fields are not familiar with abbreviations, they will not understand your title. And this is specifically important if, say, you are submitting in a broad scope journal. Then in that case, many people may not be exactly from your area of research, but they will be interested in your research for certain other areas that they are working in. And in that case, you don't want them to, be weaned away from your article. And you want them to understand what you have done. And title is the one through which they get that idea. So try avoiding abbreviations if you're submitting your manuscript to a broad scope journal. Thereafter, the second most important thing, the abstract. The abstract obviously provides the first impression, and those are just 250 words and explains the relevance of your aims, importance of your result, as you can see, validity, and of your conclusions. These are the things that readers look for. But apart from that, they also judge the EIC, they judge their writing style, um, how, whether or not the way in which you have written is good enough to be chosen for the journal that they are taking care of. So keep it simple. The first tip of the day, as I had given, keep it very simple. But because these 250 words are so very important for us, I'm giving you a brief structure of these 250 words. And as you can see, most important is results. So that takes care of the 40% of this 250 words, and rest is just for your knowledge. This is how you can roughly structure your abstract. Having said that, there are certain general rules for abstract, the don'ts. Remember, your manuscript is your story, and in that you do not provide references. Because just try to, let me explain it in a different way. Now, if you're looking at the advertisement of uh, uh, maybe an automobile, or maybe a product that you're very fond of, and in that, what do you see? You just see the details of that particular product, isn't it? Now, you will never see an advertiser mentioning about a different product. Now, why don't they do it? That's because they are talking about their product. In the same way, this abstract is your advertisement in 250 words. In that, why should you provide the references? Because references means the story of someone else. It's your story, so say it in your words. Similarly, abbreviations, a big no-no, especially in broad scope journals and even otherwise, because you want people to understand what you have written. No jargons and slang. You want it to be read properly, and no non-essential numbers and statistics, because you will get an opportunity to explain that further in your manuscript. 250 words are really, really important and precious. With that, we come to the first poll of the day. As you can see, I think it's already there. The questions are already there. The first poll is, what do you think is the unique identifier of yours in the research world? Is it DOI, or the ORCID ID, passport, or resident identity card? Which one do you think is your identifier? Come on, friends. I can see many of you are already voting. It's quite an interesting way in which things are. None of you think that passport and resident identity card is the one. And majority are leaning towards DOI, and rest on ORCID ID. Okay, if we close this, now remember one thing, DOI, or Digital Object Identifier, is the identity of your published article, not that of yours. So when you are submitting to a journal, the journal can be identified by its ISSN number. Your article, published article, is identified by DOI, and your identity in the research world is by that of ORCID. Now, before I go any further, I'm very keen to know how many of you actually have an ORCID ID. So shall we go on to the next poll of the day? Yes. So let's see how many of you already have an ORCID ID and how many do not. And that will help me in explaining it better to all of you. Because, I can't see, I'm not there live in front of you. And this is the best way for me to understand what to emphasize on when talking further about this. Okay, so majority, 61% of our friends do not have ORCID ID. So which means it's really important that, we talk further about this. Now, why am I talking about ORCID ID? Because this is actually your another tip of the day. ORCID ID is actually a 16-digit identifier. It's free. Uh, it's not something that Springer Nature has come up with. This is not related to any publisher. It is a not-for-profit organization. ORCID is, as you can see, it is a unique digital identifier of yours and your work. Now, you know, my name is Suvira. There could be many Suviras in the world. Now, how do I ensure that I have a unique identity? Along with that, whatever I have published gets accumulated in one place. And for that, ORCID ID is the best thing to do. So if you want an ORCID ID, just Google ORCID and you will reach the website. It will not take more than 5 minutes. It's a simple form that you have to fill up. And with that, you will get 16 digits ORCID ID. Now, this 16-digit ORCID ID, you have to many a times, many journals, especially all the Springer Nature journals, when you're submitting your manuscript, they ask you for this ORCID ID. And there you have to, along with your author name, affiliation, email ID, etc., you also have to give an ORCID ID if you have that. And once you publish, then against your name, as you can see here, against your Divinas, you can see this green icon. Then this ORCID ID is given. Now, many editor-in-chiefs and editorial board members are encouraging their authors and even peer reviewers to have an ORCID ID. Why are they doing so? That's because this helps them in understanding and removing ambiguity from the names of the researchers. They get to, if they click on your ORCID ID, they can actually see that you exist, you are real, and they can also see what you have published earlier and where. They can see your affiliations, where you were earlier. Now, even if you move your organization, it doesn't matter. That information also gets registered and stored in that. So they can see your journey, they can see what you have published, and that gives them the confidence that they are dealing with the right author and they are dealing with the right reviewer. This is also important if you are thinking of joining the editorial boards of any of the journals, because just to remove ambiguity, many of the board members are looking at the ORCID ID of the people who are interested in being part of their board. So this is really simple. It's easy to get, freely available. Just go for it. I think this is the need of the hour for the researchers. Having said that, now that we know how to logically organize our ideas, let's now discuss the publication strategy. The main purpose of this section is to help you understand the thought process you need to go through in deciding the type of journal that is most suitable for your study. Now, your goals obviously are to publish quickly and have impact in the field. This is how you build your reputation and advance your career. To do this, you need to choose the most appropriate journal and communicate the relevance of your study to the journal editor. But many young authors think that their goal is to publish in the journal with the highest impact factor. Well, I don't deny that a high impact factor journal looks really good on your CV, but it doesn't actually give you the kind of citations and impact that you're looking at. So if your goal is to be widely read and have an impact, to do that, you have to be sure you publish in the journal that will allow you to be most widely read. In other words, which journal will allow you to best reach your target audience is the one which is best for you. Just because you publish in a high impact factor journal, that does not mean that everyone will start reading your article. And if it is not read, then it will not have the impact. And obviously you lose out on citations. So focus on the journal, not necessarily on the impact of the journal. That's the first message. The second is the easiest assessment you can make it when you are where your findings are relevant. So if your findings are useful for researchers worldwide, then you should choose an international journal. But if your findings are only useful for researchers in your specific area, say for example, Asia Pacific, then you should choose a regional journal. It may be hard to convince an international journal editor that your regionally specific findings will be of interest to, say, readers in Australia or maybe Brazil. So if you do have regionally specific findings, but you feel they are useful worldwide, then an international journal will be appropriate. So because if you have done, say, a climate change study and it's very regional, but the implications have will have uh, is something which the researchers across the globe would be very interested in reading, then certainly you should go for an international journal. And in that, you should clearly explain this in your cover letter to the journal editor, why you are submitting to this particular journal. Thereafter, you need to decide for whom your findings are relevant, which means who do you want to influence? If you are trying to reach only readers in your specific field, then a specialized journal will be appropriate. However, if your findings will have impact for researchers in other fields too, then a more broad focused journal will be more appropriate to reach these readers. Now, once you have chosen specialized, broad focus, whatever, thereafter, then we move on to another most important thing, which is which publishing model you can choose from, subscription or open access journals. Now, subscription journals are often more established in the field because they are older. They do not charge fees to publish articles. However, keep in mind that by publishing in these journals, you restrict access to your findings to only those academics whose universities subscribe to that journal. If you want your findings to be more widely available worldwide, and most important for all, if your funder who has funded your research mandates that you have to submit in an open access journal, then yes, open access model is the one most appropriate for you. So it depends whether there are certain countries, there are certain funders who are mandating open access journals, then you have to choose open access. Otherwise, depending on your audience and the funding, etc., you can choose between these two models. And remember, how do you identify whether a journal is subscription or open access? Go on the home page of the journal, and there you will clearly see if it is open access, you will have, it will be mentioned it is open access. Otherwise, many journals will mention hybrid. Hybrid means that these are subscription journals with also a facility to publish open access. So if a funder is mandating open access, then they allow an article to be published open access within a subscription journal. That is a hybrid journal. But if you are looking at a subscription journal and you find the term hybrid on the website of a journal, you are safe. It's absolutely fine. Now, open access may be useful for many other reasons also. Obviously, as I said, there are certain funders, certain countries that do have a mandate. Now, increased accessibility is not only useful for people outside of academia, but also for academics in emerging markets where their universities do not have funding for subscription. So if your results are specifically useful for emerging markets, maybe even open access would be important. Subscription journals require you to transfer the copyright of your article to the publisher. But if you want to retain it, then again, open access is important. And because open access journals are mostly available online, they often do not need to wait for next printed issue to publish your article. Therefore, they can publish quite quickly. And because OA journals are also online, they have fewer restrictions on word and figure limits. That again is another plus. And subscription journals may have their limitations if they have their printed issues. But because of the mandate of funders and many countries, when this model evolved, along with that also evolved predatory journals. And with that has increased the problems of our researchers. It's very difficult for them to distinguish between a good or a bad journal. So on the next slide, I'm going to share with you some important tips which will help you in identifying a good journal, or rather a trustworthy journal. First, check the publisher. If it is from a reputed publisher like Springer Nature, Elsevier, PLOS, etc., then you can be confident that it is a good journal. And that is why, if you may remember, in the first, when I just started talking, I had shared with you certain brands. So you may not find Springer Nature written every time on the journals. You may have BMC, you may have Palgrave, Macmillan, etc. Similarly, Elsevier, etc. They also have various brands. So if you are aware of the brands, you can be rest assured that these publishers will never ever compromise on their reputation and quality. Secondly, carefully look at the editorial board. If you see international and familiar names, then you are in safe hands, because academicians do not give their names to the journals unless they are sure that it's a good journal. Then look for indexing. Now, where the particular journal is indexed, because why am I saying indexing databases? Because these databases have their own mechanism of evaluating every journal. But remember, many journals will also give, say, things like they'll give false information. For example, impact factor is given by Clarivate Analytics or Web of Science, as you all know. But many journals, predatory journals, will mention something like global impact factor, universal impact factor, calculated impact factor. Remember, there is nothing like these terminology. There is only one impact factor, and which is given by Web of Science. So if you see these terms, then your antennas should be up that this journal is not the one where you should submit your article. Then look for authors. Do you recognize the authors? Are these the authors that you have read while doing your research? If yes, then again, you are in the right place. Most important of all, for all the open access journals, this is only a business model of publishing. This does not in any ways mean that they will compromise on the peer review process. Never ever. Even if you are ready to pay the complete money, that will not be the criteria for the acceptance of your article. So fees will always be taken after acceptance. That will never be a criteria for the editorial board to accept your article. And if you see that emphasis in where you have submitted your article is more on fees rather than the quality of peer review process, then you should immediately withdraw your article before it gets published there. With that, we come to the next poll of the day. Because we are talking about submissions, let's see, what do you look for when choosing a journal? So what is it that you look for? Speed, informative, detailed peer review, readership and reputation of the journal, or the impact factor? That's quite interesting. Just in the beginning, I saw impact factor going up, and now readership and reputation and impact factor is going hand in hand. And now readership and reputation has actually increased. That's nice. So maybe we can close this. Yes, 15% and detail. Okay, 16. So I see majority of you are more bothered about readership and reputation of the journal. This is a really nice sign. This means that you are more bothered about the impact of your work. Now, I can see 29% are focusing on impact factor, which means that we have some young researchers who want certain journals to be looking good on CV. There's nothing wrong in it, but while you're choosing that, just be more careful about readership also, because first is the good look on your CV, but thereafter, it's actually the impact of your work. So try to have a journal that tries to give you both. Let's see the second question. Have you ever used a tool like Journal Suggester? to select a journal for submission. Now, hidden in this poll is another tip of the day. A very nice free tool, which I'm going to talk about with all of you. Okay, so as I can see, majority have actually never used it. So let's see what it is actually. Now, while selecting a journal, especially if you are interested in submitting in a Springer Nature journal, then Google Journal Suggester plus Springer, and you will come to this particular website. Write in the tentative title, maybe the method section here, certain aspects, and then refine your search by whatever is more important to you: impact factor, acceptance rate, decision, indexing databases, etc., open access journal or subscription journal, whatever is important to you, and then click on suggest journals. And within a fraction of a second, you will get a wonderful database like this. I used text which gave me this particular thing. Now, this statistics will really help you in identifying the right journal. Now, many of the friends who were saying that, for them, speed is really important. Now, in that case, applied intelligence is the right journal. But remember, acceptance rate is only 14%. Okay. And it does have a decent impact factor also. But if you have time, and if then you can maybe think of a journal which has 44% acceptance rate, but it will take on an average 106 days for first decision. So this actually gives you nice data based on which you can take a decision and identify one or two journals. And once you have identified these journals, then further go on the website of the journal. And there you will find more information. This is journal metrics, as we call it. It will talk to you about the speed of the journal, the usage. Now, many of our friends, majority rather, who were talking about readership. Now, remember, gone are those days when printed copies of the journals were distributed. Now we have online readership. And what helps you in understanding the readership? This usage. This usage actually tells you how many people have gone and downloaded this journal, various articles of this journal. So if you're bothered about readership, look for the usage of this particular journal. So this kind of information you will get over there, and this will help you in deciding which journal to choose. Thereafter, if you are still confused, then there is this particular website which is supported by all the publishers. This is Think, Check, Submit. This is www.thinkchecksubmit.org. Now, it doesn't give you a list of journals. Rather, it gives you a checklist. And this checklist has a list of questions. Now, start answering these questions. And if answer to all the questions is yes, then you are in the right journal. So these are just some of the tools and ways by which you can identify the journal to which you have to submit your manuscript, right? So now we have a manuscript. We also have an appropriate journal. So what is left? Successful journal submission. That again is a task in itself. Now, when you are submitting, many young researchers, I get many mails, how do I submit? I have this, how do I go about it? Remember, in all the majority of the global publishers, the best way to submit is submit online. This is the fastest way. And for that, look for submit online button on the home page of the journal. Now, in case of Springer Nature, in case of Springer, we have springer.com, where you can find the home page of the journals. Go on the homepage of the journals and look for submit online. Click on that. You will be asked to register as an author, and thereafter, it's very simple. Keep filling up the form and you can submit very, very quickly. Besides that, remember, most journal editors are very busy. They are not full-time editors, but full-time professors, maybe even head of departments. That means you're competing with other researchers for their limited time. Therefore, having an efficient publication strategy means that you efficiently communicate the suitability of your study to them. So make this information, they need to evaluate your paper, easy to understand in your cover letter. Because this is the first impression, this is the first time they can evaluate the significance and even the relevance of your study. So just keep in mind the most important things. And because it is so very important for all of us, I'm again giving you, a breakup of what this one-page cover letter has to include. Put yourself in the shoes of the editor-in-chief. What do you think are the things that they will be looking for? First is the title. Second is type of article. Journals publish a variety of article types, maybe research articles, short communication, review articles, letters to the editor, and each is evaluated differently. So let the journal editor know the type of article your manuscript is at the beginning of your cover letter. Then you need to briefly describe why the study needs to be done, introduce the topic of the study, and what challenges researchers are facing regarding this topic. Then concisely discuss your study design, and highlight the one or two important findings. This is to emphasize why your study is important to the field. Next, you need to convince the journal editor that your manuscript will be interesting to the journal editor readers. Otherwise, they will not send it further for peer reviewing and they will simply reject it. So always read the aims and scope. And if you can find certain key topics that the editor-in-chiefs are looking for, put it up here in the cover letter. This will help them in picking your article very quickly. Finally, it is also a good idea to recommend 3 or 4 potential reviewers for your manuscripts. Remember, when you are recommending reviewers, 99% those reviewers will not be chosen, just maybe one at the most. But this way, the editors, they build up the database, peer review database. Lastly, you should highlight important issues related to publication ethics, which we will discuss in the next slide. So just keep in mind these important points when you are writing the cover letter. Thereafter, all the journal editors, they want an original, unpublished work, not submitted to other journals. They also look for conflict of interest, and there are ways in which they check plagiarism, etc. So keep in mind these things: data fabrication, falsification, improper use of human subjects and animals. These things are a big no-no, and you're also asked to quantify and clarify whether these aspects are taken care of at the time of submission. With that, we come to the next poll of the day. This is another interesting poll which asks you, have you ever changed, which means added or deleted the author of your article at the time of peer review or after acceptance? Yes or no? Majority of you are saying no, and 10% are saying yes. So let's go to the next poll. What was the reason given for the change of authorship? Were you asked to do more experiments, simulations, whatever, at the time of peer review, or the new suggested authors did copy editing or proofreading, or you had to oblige certain authors, or there were discrepancy in the order of the author? Now, hidden in this poll are certain hints that I'm going to give to you. Okay, as I can see, majority of our friends are saying that there were more experiments had to be done. This is absolutely fine, because if you have been asked to do certain things at the time of the peer review process, and you had to then include another author because you had to take help from another lab and other researchers, etc., this is absolutely fine. Now, as far as our friends, 24% of our friends who are saying copy editing, well, if somebody did copy editing and proofreading, then that do not qualify them to be the author of the article, mention them in acknowledgement, but do not insist in including their names as an author. That's a big no-no. And obviously, obliging is another big no-no. And discrepancy in the order of author is something which shows that you were not careful enough at the time of submission, and it doesn't reflect very well on you, because the systems, while you're submitting, clearly prompt for certain information. So read while you are submitting your manuscript very clearly. That way also you try to give an impression. Now, once you have convinced the journal editor that your study may be suitable for publication in their journal, you have overcome the first obstacle in publishing. Next obstacle is peer review. Now, have you ever actually, do you ever get this kind of feeling that everybody, all the peer reviewers are not understanding what you have submitted? They are there to axe and shred and tear apart your paper. But let me tell you, this is the way in which we can improve our study and manuscript. And it also ensures that the right relevant studies are published. Now, in the times of COVID, we have become more and more aware of the importance of publishing the right relevant study, because you know how negative impact a wrong published study can have. So peer review is the foundation of academic publishing. It is the most important thing that your article undergoes. So you have to ensure that journal editors have all the information they need to make their decisions, because if they have that, then they will quickly take a decision, yes or no. And this is done in the response letters after revision. One of the most common mistakes that authors make in the response letter is that, and even journal editors really do not like this, is only saying that revision was done. Now, do we want the handling editors to look for what was done and where it was done? That's a very, very painful thing. And that's why, I'm giving you a tip on how to write the response letter when you have received reviewer comments. The handling editors, they want to know why you agree or even disagree. This shows them that you have understood the reviewer's concerns. If you do disagree, be sure to support your claims with evidence. They want to know what revisions were made. So even highlight that, mention that, and where can they find it? That's important. So, many times I've seen that when revisions are being submitted, many authors even submit within their response letter a small table which clearly says, this is what was asked, this is what we did, and this is where you can find it. This is how we have highlighted it, maybe in blue or yellow or whatever. This really allows the handling editor to quickly look at the manuscript, and if they find all the questions answered, all the concerns answered, then they immediately give a suggestion to the editor-in-chief to accept or reject or the manuscript. So this really speeds up your decision-making process. With that, I think we come to the last poll of the day. And this poll is basically what happens if you have done everything and your manuscript gets rejected. Is that the end of the world, or do you have to go through the whole process again? Or have you ever transferred your manuscript to another Springer Nature journal if declined from the previous journal? And if you did that, did you already have a destination journal in mind, or without a destination journal, or perhaps you really don't know what I'm talking about? So I see that majority do not know what I'm talking about, but we do have some very aware researchers with us today who not only transferred their article, but also did it in a destination journal because they knew exactly where they had to submit. This is very nice. So let's talk about this because we do not know this. it's important for you all to know. Now, what happens is, just as you all keep working in improving your research and manuscript, even we try to support you all better. And for that, we have a transfer desk. Now, when an article, now there are various reasons, why an article can be rejected by a journal. That does not mean that the article uh, had something wrong in it. Perhaps it could be the reason that that particular journal was publishing too many similar articles, or they were looking for something different. And when the editor-in-chief feels that it's fine, they cannot accommodate this particular article, but there may be other journals quite relevant for that research. So they give the decision terms as reject and transfer. Now, transfer means your article goes to the transfer desk of Springer Nature. There we have colleagues sitting there. They actually read your paper, evaluate it, and they already have, they are aware of the journals that are looking for similar articles. And they then suggest to you maybe 4 or 5 journals that may be interested in your article. And then it is for you to choose. Now, many of our friends who were saying that they already had a destination journal, so they knew very well that if not in this journal, then they would like to be shifted to another journal of their choice, which again is fine. So either of the two, whatever you have in mind, you try to make use of this service, because you then do not have to reinvent the wheel. And for the benefit of the researchers, we have also launched another brand, which is SN, which brings together the might of both Springer and Nature, and one subject per journal. We have come up with like SN Applied Sciences, SN Operations Research, etc. These are these broad focused journals that are actually looking for similar kind of transfers. Of course, they have other submissions also, but because they are broad focused, they can accommodate more transfers. Now, what if you do not even have to go via transfers and you are the chosen one, you get published? Well, that's celebration times, isn't it? But does that mean to say that you have to put your feet up and sit back and relax? Not really. You should attend conferences to discuss your work. You will be able to interact with your peers face to face to discuss your recent studies. These are also likely your target readers. So let them know what you have published to increase your visibility in the field. By doing so, you will not only improve your impact, but you will likely establish new collaborations that can further improve your reputation and publication output as well. But also think of promoting your work on social media. This is the digital age, you have LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Promote your work worldwide so that more and more people can read it. And there are various ways by which you can do it and still attract more attention. So just as I was showing you journal metrics, we also have article metrics. So while you are putting up your information of your published article on social media, you can also see more and more people downloading your articles, and that way you can build up the reputation of your own article. With that, we come to an end of our coming together. Let's see, what questions do we have?
Thank you, Kusura. There are some questions that I will show you on screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, there are 6 questions from our participants. So for the first question, implications are very important. However, it is difficult to write them well. Please give the suggestion to write the clear implications.
That's really interesting. Sorry for this. I understand what you're trying to say. Now, the best way to think of writing about implications is, I do hope you have study groups in your research group or in your labs. I think this is something that if you get an opportunity to discuss with your maybe your peer, your PhD researchers about what implications does the work that you are doing will have, then it is easier, because first is sometimes your thoughts can be muddled and there could be a lot of confusion as to which are the best implications. Then it is best to discuss it amongst your peer and your supervisor. That way you can identify, when you're discussing these things, you can identify 2, 3, 4 implications, and that will help you in keying it down better. Because once you know your implications well, then you can write those down better. And to know them better, it's better to discuss it in your peer. There's no shortcut to that. Second one is, if I am student in doctoral degree, yeah, yes.
Yes, can I apply to receive the ORCID beforehand?
Yes, certainly you can. ORCID IDs doesn't, I mean, it doesn't mention that you have to have a doctoral degree. Anybody, even with masters, can go ahead and apply for ORCID. And it's better that you do it then.
Yeah. For the third question, is it possible to send out a draft paper to more than one journal at a time?
Well, this is unethical. In fact, if you submit simultaneously to different journals, remember, the publishers are also becoming very intelligent. They are using artificial intelligence, and there are teams that are constantly looking for duplicate submissions, as we call it. And if your article is identified in those duplicate submissions, remember, it will be rejected from all the journals that you have submitted, because it is an unethical practice. So that's why I put so much of emphasis on choosing the right journal. Choose the right journal and submit to the first journal that you feel is most appropriate. Once you are rejected, then go to another one. And that's why, because we understand that it is so very difficult, we have this transfer service for you, so that there is a team which works with you and who knows what the editor-in-chiefs are looking for. And then they can suggest, okay, these are the journals, which one would you like to go for? So only one journal at a time. No duplicate submissions, please.
Okay. For the question number 4, how to classify quartile of journal and calculation percentage of journal ranking?
See, as a researcher, I don't think you have to get into these calculations yourself. These quartiles are available very clearly on Scopus website and that of Web of Science. Now, certain journals you will find that they may have different quartiles for 1 or 2 subject categories. That is because if it is a broad scope journal, it may be publishing articles in, maybe publishing more articles in 2 particular subject categories of, say, Web of Science. So Web of Science will evaluate it for both the categories. But you have to select the category in which you are submitting that particular article. For example, if you are submitting to a computer science journal and the journal has quartile ranking 3 in artificial intelligence and maybe 2 in theory of computer science, and you are submitting your article in theory of computer science, then it is fine. It has Q2 quartile, and if that is what your university asks for, you can go for it. So look for the ranking of that particular database that you are referring to. They have their own parameters, and they have their own databases. Now, Scopus has more journals. Their quartile ranking will be different of a particular journal as compared to that of Web of Science. Both of them have their own parameters. So don't do your calculations. Just look at the rankings which are given on these databases website. Okay, how
yes.
to know percentile of a journal? Okay. I'll have to log in for that. That may make my actually wanted to show you, but if for that I will have to log into the system. The next question is how to know the percentile. Yeah, the journal ranking.
Yeah.
Actually, if you go in Web of Science, if your university has allows you access to maybe Scopus or Web of Science, go on these databases and you can clearly see the journal ranking.
Yes. For the question number 6, normally students have to depend on the advisor to select the journal. So we have to submit the same paper to several journals until get acceptance. This is very difficult to change the pattern according to the journal. Do you have any advice to change the style easily?
Now, your question in itself gives the answer, because you're saying we have to submit the same paper to several journals until get acceptances, which means that you are submitting the same journal without reading the aims and scope and without reading the instruction for authors. It's fine that your supervisor is advising you to select a journal, which is fine because they are more experienced, they know the field better, and it's easier for them to know which journal is most suitable for your study, which is fine. But when you are submitting, it is for you that the article gets accepted. And for the article to get accepted, you have to play that intelligent role. So when you are submitting to a particular journal, please read their aims and scope, which shows what they are looking for, and the instruction for authors. And always try to tweak the manuscript depending on the requirements of the journal. Because you know what happens? What happens behind the scene is when the moment you submit an article, the first step in any journal is that a technical check. There is a team which looks at your article technically. And if they don't find the important things that the journal is looking for in your manuscript, they will reject the article or they'll simply send it back to you saying this is not up to the mark. So again, you will have to redo it. So why do you want to keep doing the same thing? Just be a little more intelligent. Look at the style which is required by the journal. This is very, very important. And then submit. And remember, there is no shortcut to success. You have to work on these things. So look at these things very clearly. Then only you will get a faster acceptance.
Yeah. Okay. I think there are some questions left. For the first one, the question is, for those low acceptance journals, what is the general main reason to reject the manuscript?
For low acceptance journal, it could be that they are already receiving many submissions. That could be one thing. We have also studied why these, sometimes the journals reject so many manuscripts. Now, one could be that they have certain restrictions for certain number of articles to be published, and they are very clear of the numbers that they have to publish in an issue, and they already have a huge backlog, and they would not like to accept too many more articles. So they are very comfortable in that space, and they would not like to increase the number of publications. So that's why they may reject. The second reason could be that they are looking for a certain type of articles. Maybe they are looking for certain novel ideas, maybe they are looking for more review articles or some other category. Even within their subject area, they're looking for certain specific articles, and or rather they may be working on certain invited articles. Just as we work in developing our research, the journal editors also work in improving their journals, and for the development of their journals they have a vision. So if depending on what relates to their vision, they will try to reject or accept an article. There could be various reasons for that. Now we are also constantly working as publishing teams. We are working with the journal editors in letting them know what percentage of acceptance do they have and how it is going up or down. So the editor-in-chiefs are always aware of this thing, but they may have certain ideas, or they are receiving too many articles, uh, too many quality articles, and they have to pick and choose out of those. There could be various reasons actually.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next one is, the question is, I understand we should use simple English in the manuscript, but for non-English speaking authors, what are the tips you could give us to improve the quality of English besides the paid services like language editing service?
In fact, you may be aware that Nature also have a copy editing service. That's really good. That's also something that can be used. The other important thing which I have done in my life is, and I continue doing, is improving a language is an ongoing process. So you have to read a lot, and you have to write down right phrases. Like suppose if you are doing literature review, or not just literature review, if you're reading any economist or any magazine, and you write like certain phrases, put them down in one place, just in one word file, and when you start working on your manuscript, just go back to those phrases, or just go back to those papers where you found that the author has really done the beginning of the introduction in a beautiful way, which could actually relate to your work also. So you could take ideas. Improving a language means you read as much as possible. You see the style of what others are doing and how they are doing it. And in fact, if you look at even the newspaper articles, the way in which journalists write, how beautifully they are able to explain the concept, the whole idea, the concerns in just few words. So try to imbibe that in your manuscript. So that is actually an ongoing process that we have to constantly work on our language if we are really, if we really want to improve it. And in fact, there are certain free apps available. Even BBC has that app that you can improve your language uh, by using those apps in your free time.
Yeah. Okay. So next question, my research took place in 2019 and finished writing in mid 2020. However, was rejected in December in 2020. How much time do I have before the research remains relevant? I sent it out in mid 2021, but have not heard feedback yet.
Which, by your question, I get the feeling that you are in a fast-moving discipline where things change very fast. Because if you talk about this concern to a person working in, say, linguistic or human science discipline, their shelf life of research is very long. Now, it all depends. Now, suppose if you are in such a fast-moving discipline, maybe say in engineering or computer science, then have you thought of submitting your manuscript in a proceedings, if that is your area? Because their chances of getting acceptance is of, is much better. Otherwise, then if you think that your research will become redundant, then this is something to be discussed with your supervisor as to how and what needs to be done to continue to make it more relevant.
Yeah. For the next question, regarding transfer desk service, can the service be taken if the article is just rejected and not rejected and transfer, like you mentioned?
Unfortunately, the article has to be sent to the transfer desk by the editor-in-chief, because if they feel that the article is just not good enough for any of the journals, then they will reject and not transfer. So the onus of transferring is actually to the handling editor, the board, and the editor-in-chief, not otherwise.
Okay. For the next, some questions. It is considered not so good for an author to have too many journal publications in a single year. Too many refers to more than 3 or 4.
Again, it depends the area that you are in. But yes, many times, like suppose if I receive a CV, I'll always look at how many publications you have had and which area you are in. So for example, like you are in an engineering area or even say computer science, it's absolutely fine to first publish in a proceedings and then publish a longer version in a journal. It's absolutely acceptable. But if you are submitting different research manuscripts in different journals, then it raises a question mark, because there is always a capacity that a researcher can have. And if you are jumping from one research topic to another, and sometimes they even jump from one research area to another, then that actually attracts a red flag, because how much can one accomplish in a year, and even for that matter in 4 or 5 years? So these are something that are very carefully looked upon when your CV is analyzed. So keep in mind these aspects, because I don't know which area you are in. So keep in mind how your research community functions, and then look at the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. I think we still have time for one question. So the last question would be, how does review paper work?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. What was that?
The question said that, how does review paper work?
Review process of a paper, right?
Yes, right.
That is the question.
I think so, yes.
Yes. See, review, now every journal has a board and an editor-in-chief. So the journal is actually, when you submit an article, the editor-in-chief looks at the article, then they assign it to an editorial board member. That editorial board member could be an associate editor or a handling editor. Different journals have their different designations to handle those papers. And these editors then further assign reviewers. And these, now they may assign it to 3 or 4 reviewers. Out of that, 1 or 2 may accept. But COPE guidelines say that the article has to be reviewed at least by 2 people. So those the reviewers have to first accept to be the reviewer of that particular manuscript. Then they are given certain time frame to evaluate that paper. They submit back their suggestions, and those suggestions are then compiled and shared with you by the handling editor or the associate editor, whoever is taking care of the review process. So that's how it works. And thereafter, and also the handling editor or the associate editor also looks at your article. And once they compile those comments, then those are shared with you by the journal editorial office, and then you start working in improving your manuscript. And once you submit the revised version, again, it is reviewed. either by the same reviewers, and the handling editor could also invite more reviewers to look into the aspects. Thereafter, only a decision is taken. So it is a longish process, and that's why it takes time.
Yeah, I think here we come to the end of today. That would be for the last question. I would like to thank you to speaker Kun Suvira for a very useful section all participants. Before we end the event today, please help to give your feedback about the event. Please feel free to give feedback for further improvement to the team. And thank you. And I would like to end off the talk for now. Stay safe. Thank you.